Let's talk about how to implement twin gates. If you use a lot of Windows, and especially if you use domain controllers and Active Directory, because there are a couple of things to know and a couple of things to do to make sure that twin gate works well and intercepts the right traffic, provides the right user experience for your users if you use those things. Now, to start with, why Active Directory is special and what use cases people adapt TwinGate to when they use domain controllers in Active Directory. They boil down to the same particularity about Windows and about Active Directory. It's that your domain controllers need to be reached by devices, but not by people. So you're very rarely, unless you work in IT, you're not going to see a ton of end users that need to connect to their domain controllers themselves as people to do things on the servers. But machines do need to do that because they need to update policies locally from the domain controller. That happens very often before logon, so at boot time. And even when users are trying to access certain resources, like something like a file share, often, if there's domain controllers involved, while the user is trying to mount a file share onto their Windows machine, there is going to be some underlying traffic between the machine and domain controllers that is outside of view of the user. And so you need to factor that in when you deploy TwinGate and create your resources. So if we start with the first use case, which is really start before logon, it is to allow devices to connect to domain controllers even before a user is authenticated against Windows. So it allows the device to reach the private domain controller and download new policies, for instance. The second use case is if you have any technology or endpoint your users are connecting to that requires Active Directory, then we'll need to adapt to that as well. So the following guide covers what you need to do and in what order to cover both of those use cases. Now, it's not a very difficult process to do. The only thing you need to really remember is that you're going to need TwinGate to intercept all the traffic that covers what users are connecting to, but also what devices are connecting to. So the first guide for that is Active Directory. You should probably start there. Let's take a look at the guide itself. It's in our documentation. If you look for Active Directory, you should find it. And this is what we need to do. Those are the resources that we first need to create in TwinGate to make sure that the domain is registered as a resource. So let's just assume the same model. We're going to create a yourcompany.com here. That's going to be my top level domain. Put it in our remote network. All those resources, because they're typically underlying resources used by other things, they should be accessed by everyone. So we recommend setting them as under the everyone group. That's one. Let's assume the same here, and let's just assume one domain controller, DC1. There we go. So it's going to be the same remote network. We're not going to touch the policy for now. And we're going to give this access to everyone. Very importantly, we need this one as well so that the traffic sent from the client is intercepted as well. So TCP AD traffic is good enough in this case. There we go. So now we have three resources. A resource for the domain, a resource for my domain controller, and a resource for my Active Directory traffic. That's a great start. That actually covers, I believe, step one. And because everyone has access to those resources, it means that traffic for Active Directory, traffic to the domain controllers and on your domain are going to be intercepted by the TwinGate client. Now, the second thing you need to do is, if you think about it, your devices, again, need to be able to access the domain controllers without the user being authenticated to the operating system or to TwinGate itself. Now, by now you know that all resources are protected behind a policy. But if a policy requires authentication, then this cannot work, because if a policy requires authentication, then at boot time authentication has not happened, which means the device cannot connect to your domain controller. So what you need to do in this case is you first need to create a new policy that we're going to call the device only policy. This device only policy is going to have an authentication that is, I think 31 days might be the max. There we go. No multi-factor authentication required, but more importantly, no authentication requirement enabled. So you're going to go ahead and click disable here. And this device only policy is going to only allow trusted devices to connect to certain resources, but it's not going to require user authentication. So basically, if you apply this to all of the 3 resources we created prior, it means that devices are going to be able to connect to the domain controller, the traffic is going to be intercepted by TwinGate, and everything's going to work well, even if the user itself is not authenticated. Now, final thing we need to do for this part, go back to our resources, and for all 3 resources, we're going to change the policy to a device-only policy. So TCP Active Directory. I'm going to do the same for my domain controller. And I'm going to do the same for our domain here. Final thing you have to do is if you go to policies here, make sure that your minimum authentication requirements also don't require MFA and are set to 31 days as well, because the minimum authentication requirements are a mandatory requirement before resource policies. So if you activate MFA here, it also means that your devices will not be able to connect to your domain controllers, to your domain controllers prior to user authentication and MFA fulfillment. So don't activate that in your minimum minimum authentication requirements. That takes care of step 1, takes care of step 2, takes care of steps 3. And step 4.A, 4.B are not necessary, although they are. 4.A is probably almost always necessary. 4.B, it is not. You have the option to, if you want to create a separate remote network for your Active Directory traffic, you totally can do that. It can make some troubleshooting a little bit easier, but it's not mandatory. The one thing to remember is this here. That is quite important for Windows because sometimes users are going to go and use host names without fully qualified domain names. And so you should declare, let me see if it's covered here. There we go. If users are using host names without domains when connecting to resources, then you need to create resources for those host names and then set search domains for your connectors. Right, so if a user is going to use server1 instead of server1.mydomain.int, you should have a resource for both the version that has the full domain and one that is only the host name. This is to make sure that the traffic gets intercepted properly, because sometimes Windows has a tendency to add search domains on the client side. But if you have both resources that are declared and assigned to a group for a user, whether they talk to the host name directly without the domain name and the domain gets added or doesn't get added, or they talk to the fully qualified domain name directly, all of the traffic gets intercepted by TwinGate and sent to the connector. Now remember that one of the prerequisites for the connector is that the connector needs to be able to resolve what traffic it sees from the client. So if your client's using just server1 and not the domain, your connector needs to be able to resolve server1 without the domain as well. And so sometimes you will need to add search domains to the host where your connector is so that the connector knows what domains to search the host name on. And if you've implemented all of those things, you should be able to run domain controller, Active Directory, and all of the associated traffic through TwinGate without a problem.